The Bible contains the mind of God, the state of man, the way of salvation, the doom of sinners, and the happiness of believers. Its doctrines are holy, its precepts are binding, its stories are true, and its decisions are immutable. Read it to be wise, believe it to be safe, and practice it to be holy. It contains light to direct you, food to support you, and comfort to cheer you. It is the traveler's map, the pilgrim's staff, the pilot's compass, the soldier's sword, and the Christian's charter. Here, paradise is restored, heaven opened, and the gates of hell disclosed. Christ is its grand subject, our good the design, and the glory of God its end. It should fill the memory, rule the heart, and guide the feet. Read it slowly, frequently, and prayerfully. It is a mine of wealth, health to the soul, and a river of pleasure. It involves the highest responsibility, will reward the greatest labor, and will condemn all who trifle with its sacred contents. Pray it in, read it through, live it out, and pass it on.
At the start of 1 Samuel, God's people were in a complete mess, doing whatever evil they wanted to, because there was no king in the land. Then we zoomed in on a woman called Hannah who cried out to the Lord for help. And God answered her by providing her with a son called Samuel. Hannah burst into a song of praise, saying, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. There is no one like the Lord. There is no God like our God." But her song finished rather strangely, saying, "He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." But there was no king. When Samuel grew up, the Lord used him in extraordinary ways, the most extraordinary being this: the Lord revealed himself to Samuel through his word, and his word came to all Israel. But God's people ignored his word and so treated God terribly. Instead of worshipping him and being ruled by him, they treated him like a lucky charm to be toyed with instead of worshipped. And so, to bring them to their senses, God allowed them to be defeated terribly in a battle by the Philistines. And the ark of God was captured and taken into the Philistine country. But there, the Lord defeated all of his enemies, the gods, rulers, and cities of the Philistines, because the Lord alone defeated his enemies. The Lord was Israel's perfect ruler. But even so, God's people still rejected him as king. They said, "We want a different king." They put it like this: "We want a king over us. Then we shall be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." And so, although it displeased God, he gave them the king of their choosing, Saul. But Saul ignored God's word, so God rejected him. Samuel put it like this: "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord has rejected you as king." The Lord went on to choose and anoint a new king called David. Now, he wasn't the most impressive person in his family, so it would have been easy to miss him. That's because people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And David's heart trusted the Lord. And so God chose him to be the future king. Now the Philistines were back to fight God's people, and this time they had a 10-foot tall giant called Goliath to fight for them. Everyone was terrified to fight him, except little David, who thought, I can beat him because the Lord will give me strength. And then the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. It's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. And that's exactly what happened. With a slingshot and a pebble, Goliath was defeated. Thump, 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 boom, no. Pretty much from that moment on, Saul was jealous of David and wanted to kill him. So David ran away. But the Lord always protected and provided for his anointed one. Now, not everyone treated David, the future king, like that. For example, Prince Jonathan, who was Saul's son, and most people expected to be the future king of Israel, loved David. He loved him so much that he promised to be on David's team. He gave him his sword, his spear, his royal robe, and even his future crown. Jonathan said, "The Lord witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever." It wasn't just Jonathan that went to David for protection and provision. His family, David's family, came too, but it wasn't just them. There were all sorts of others, waifs and strays, desperate men, foreigners, and all of them received God's protection because they'd come to God's king and said, I'm with him. But it wasn't that way for Saul and all who were with him. They all died in a terrible battle. So there you have it. 2 kings. To which king would you say, I'm with him? The king God chose, or the king man chose?
Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the birth of Samuel as we begin a study of 1 Samuel. But first we need to begin with an overview just of these 2 books, 1st and 2nd Samuel, which are really composed as one continuous book. It's split up for convenience sake, probably because the scroll would have been a bit too long. 1 Samuel is going to be really the story of the rise and fall of Saul, although we won't read about Saul until we get to chapter 8. And then 2 Samuel is going to be the rise and fall of King David. 1 Samuel, we're actually going to start with the story of Samuel himself. We'll see the Ark of the Covenant featured prominently in this section of the story. Next, we'll see the story of Saul, the rise of Saul, and how he becomes king and how that goes for a time. And then finally, we'll see David, where Saul is still king during this period, but we're going to see David, and he'll specifically be seen as David the fugitive. Then as we get into 2 Samuel, right at the end of 1 Samuel, we'll see the death of Saul. 2 Samuel, we'll see David as king in the first 10 chapters. In chapters 11 through 20, he'll still be king, but we're going to be focusing upon David's family troubles, and they will be considerable. And finally, we get to the last section, chapters 21 through 24. There will be a collection of stories about David and about his mighty men. So we could actually call that sort of the epilogue of the book. It's fun to take a note of what New Testament books might correlate with with these books of Samuel, I'm going to suggest that there's a correlation between Samuel and the Gospel of Luke. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Samuel begins with the story of the birth of Samuel. In Luke, the story begins with the birth of Jesus, but really John the Baptist as the forerunner of Jesus. It's his birth as well. In Samuel, 1st Samuel begins and 2nd Samuel ends at the tabernacle. We have the tabernacle in the beginning, and what will eventually be the temple at the end of 2nd Samuel. Likewise, the Gospel of Luke begins and ends at the temple. In Samuel, in 2nd Samuel in particular, Nathan is going to tell David a very long parable, one of the longer parables that we have in the historical books. And of course, Luke is the gospel of the long parables. Luke has several of these long parables that are given in the second section of the Gospel of Luke. In Samuel, we have a long Jerusalem narrative. In fact, there's going to be a section where David has to leave Jerusalem. And you could have told that story just in one verse, but instead it's going to draw it out step by step. We're going to see David departing from Jerusalem during that family crisis section of 2nd Samuel. In Luke, there's a section where Jesus sets his face to go toward Jerusalem, and the whole latter half of the book, he's getting closer and closer and closer to Jerusalem. So there's a Jerusalem emphasis in both of these books. And so we begin, chapter 1, verse 1. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim, Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, that's central Israel, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and she's going to be the focus of this first chapter. And the name of the other was Peninnah, and Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. And already that reminds me of a number of stories from the Old Testament that we've already seen up to this point. The story of Sarah, who was barren, the story of Rebecca for a time was barren, the story of Rachel, who was also married to, of course, you had Leah and Rachel, the sisters who were married to Jacob, and Rachel for a time was barren. And here's Hannah, also barren, and that was considered to be a great disgrace. Now, we look at this story, and again, there's a similarity to a story that's just earlier in the book of Judges chapter 13, with the Samson narrative. That had started off, there was a certain man of Zoa of the family of Danites. Notice this story has started off likewise. It's part of the same formula, where there was a certain man from Ramathaim, Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim. So a certain man and the tribe that which he's from, and then his name, whose name was Manoah, whose name was Elkanah, and in Judges, and his wife was barren and had borne no children. And now in 1 Samuel 1 verse 2, and Hannah had no children. So it's going to remind us also of the story of Samson, and there will be some interesting parallels between the story of Samson and the story of Samuel. They will both be great men before the Lord, and they will both be dedicated to the Lord from the time of their birth. Verse 3, now, right now, the focus is upon this man Elkanah. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Shiloh was the place where the tabernacle was located. And we read in the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, we're going to get to know them later on, were priests to the Lord there. And so here we're brought to this place, Shiloh, where the tabernacle had been, and the tabernacle had been there now for a very long time. So long that it had become a permanent fixture. We're actually going to refer to it as a temple. Reminds me of these mobile home parks that are full of mobile homes, but because they're mobile home parks, the mobile homes aren't mobile anymore. They don't go anywhere. And the tabernacle, which originally had been a portable tent, is now like that. It doesn't travel any longer. Verse 4, when the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah, he would give a double portion. There were no children that she had to give to, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. And so it emphasizes again this womb closure, this barrenness, which was a great disgrace to her. Verse 6, and to make matters worse, her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. There's jealousy. Whenever you have two wives, you're going to have issues. And so there's jealousy between the two and provocation that takes place. Verse 7, it happened year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. Verse 8, then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat, and why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Again, that phrase is familiar to us. In the book of Ruth, we had the women of the town after the birth of the baby to Ruth. They came to Naomi and they said, for your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to this new child. Well, Hannah hadn't had any children, and so she's weeping, even though her husband loves her. Notice, am I not better to you than 10 sons? Verse 9, then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat by the doorposts of the temple of the Lord. She, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. So you have Eli, business as usual. He's at the temple, at the tabernacle. Hannah comes. It's not business as usual. She's in great distress, and she is praying. Verse 11,